Hello everyone and welcome back to the Professional Diploma in Photoshop. Welcome to Module 1, Lesson number 2. This is the interface for the very first version, or at least version 1.0.7 of Adobe Photoshop. As you can see, circa 1989, 1990. And as you can see there as well, only 4 names: Thomas Noel, John Noel, Steve Gutman and Russell Brown. If you have a look at the program, or you load up the program nowadays, you'll know that there is hundreds of names now on that opening screen. But very, very interesting and very retro as well. And as you can see there, it is also just for Mac. So it was actually not until later on that the program was available on Windows system as well, but initially had been developed for Mac users. So a little bit of interesting history there around Adobe Photoshop. So my name is William Eames. I am your course educator. Thank you once again for joining me for your professional diploma in Photoshop. I hope you all enjoyed lesson number 1. We got familiar with the interface and we made a business card, and thank you so much to all of you for sharing your business cards via Facebook. Do remember to download our app for the best experience. You can also catch up on recordings there as well if you miss any recordings, and also there's always a countdown timer to your next class so that you never miss a lesson. So remember as well, don't drop out. You are going to see success in every single lesson. Every lesson you're going to add valuable new skills that you can use within Photoshop to achieve your goals. And it really is that simple. All you have to do is attend every single lesson. As I mentioned in the first lesson, all our lessons are interactive, so do ask plenty of questions and chat with Morpheus. Put your questions to the classroom as well, and please remember to keep rating those responses so we can improve Morpheus and improve your experience on these lessons as well. Any outstanding questions that you have, or anything you just want to share, any comments, anything else like that, email us at support@shawacademy.com. And again, let's just put Morpheus to the test. And here's a question for you, and I think it's a very important question to ask ourselves: is Photoshop cheating? What do you think? Is editing photographs within Photoshop, is it cheating? And this is a kind of a debate that's always existed around Photoshop, but do you know what? It's not a new debate at all. The idea of photo manipulation and photo editing has actually existed since the invention of photography. The only difference is that we did it through the darkroom. But, you know, photographs like this, like these kind of photo montages, these composites, these were also done through the darkroom as well. But it was literally cutting and pasting parts of negatives and parts of photographs together to create these types of images. Photoshop is just a way of doing it digitally now, and I don't think it's cheating personally. Photoshop, as I mentioned many times in the first lesson, is a creative tool and should be seen as such. What Photoshop should not be used for is to correct things that you should be getting right, whether it's in camera or whether it's correcting issues with your design that you should have had right from the start. But especially when it comes to photography, you should be aiming to get it right within camera first of all, and then taking your photographs to the next step through Photoshop. And obviously with these types of images here, we simply cannot create them easily in real life. I mean, it would be possible. You obviously have to suspend somebody, in this type of image using wires. And then, of course, you're having to Photoshop those wires out afterwards. So the program is going to play a part in this process no matter what you do. But I don't think it should be seen as cheating at all, because it's essentially a digital darkroom. And that's my point of view. But let us know what your point of view is through Morpheus. And that very much leads us on into what we're covering in this lesson. Lesson number 2, we're going to have a look at making adjustments. How we can start editing our photographs, and how we can take a photograph where, like this, we can see it's maybe a little bit underexposed. We're losing lots and lots of detail here in the foreground. And this is a situation where it's very difficult to get it right in camera due to dynamic range, something which we discuss in depth on our photography course, where it's just simply impossible to expose for the sky and indeed expose for the foreground at the same time because the light is just too different. This is where we need to edit our photographs. This is where we have to bring them into a program like Photoshop and make some adjustments. So we're going to have a look at how to adjust a photograph. Our goal at the end of this lesson is to understand how you can control and enhance your images. We'll talk about destructive adjustments, how you can avoid destructive adjustments, and understand the building blocks of all of our images, which is the pixels. And we're going to have a look at two types of main adjustments, which are our tonal adjustments and color adjustments. So tonal adjustments is when we brighten up a photograph or we darken up a photograph, we add a little bit of contrast to it, we add a little bit more depth to it. We're controlling, as opposed, for want of a better word, the luminosity, the overall brightness of a photograph through tonal adjustments. And then we'll have a look at our color adjustments, how we can correct white balance issues, if the photograph is a little bit too cold, or perhaps we want to add a warmth to our photograph, perhaps we want to add some coldness to our images, and we'll have a look at how we can do that through color adjustments as well. But before we do any of that, we need to speak about the pixel. The pixel is the building block to our photographs and to our images as well. Pretty much any digital image is made up of a pixel. A pixel, to be very, very blunt about it, is simply a square dot of color, a single dot of color. It's a perfect square and it can only be square. So we call them square dots. And a pixel can only ever be one tone or one color. So tone, when I say tone, what I mean is it's a different shade of grey. So from black to grey to white, that is tone. Color is color. It's when we add a color to that tone. We can have a bright color or we can have a dark color, and that's a combination of tone and color together. But when I speak about tone, it's light to dark, and then color is the actual color itself. But a pixel can only be a single tone or color. It can never be a combination of two of them. And it's these variations of tones and these variations of colors, when they're grouped together, that make up our images, that make up our photographs. As I mentioned, it can only ever be one. No matter how much you look in closely to a photograph, no matter how much you try to pick out a pixel that has a variation of colors in it, you'll never find one that is two tones or two colors. And as we group these pixels together, this is how we begin to form our images. So it might be a tricky one to figure out right now, but what do you think that you're looking at here in this image? Now obviously we're very zoomed in here. We can see we're very, very close to the image, that we can actually see those individual pixels. Like I said, try to pick out a pixel here on screen. Now it might be tricky depending on what type of monitor you're looking at on this. If you're watching this on your phone, it might be a little bit difficult to see the individual pixels. But no matter how much you go through this image and try to pick out a pixel that has two tones in it, they simply don't. Every single pixel here is a single tone or a single color, and when they're grouped together like this, they begin to form our images. And when we zoom out, well, we can see now what we're looking at. So we are looking at a wave, and if I just section off the part of the image that we were looking at, so we were so close on this image, we're actually able to see the individual pixels. But taking a step backwards, we can see the full image, and the image resolves to our eyes. And this is where the term resolution comes from. It's when these pixels come together to form an image that resolves to our eyes. That is the resolution of the image. That is how many pixels are in the image to create an image that we can see and that we know and that we understand. So then, with that in mind, what are adjustments? Well, adjustments basically are used to enhance, and I use that word enhance, our images and our photographs. We don't want to have that word fix. We don't want to have that word fix in our minds. We want to enhance our images. Adjustments take tonal, so that's black and white, as I mentioned, so black to grey to white, and colour on your image, so you can change the colour and you can change the brightness and the darkness, and adjustments can be applied destructively and non-destructively. Now what I mean by that is when we make changes to our images, to our photographs, if we save those changes to a JPEG file, we open up that JPEG file again, we make more changes, we save that again. JPEGs compress every time we save them, and they compress to make a smaller file size, but that means that they lose information, and if we do that too often, it destroys the image, it destroys the file, because it disregards, it dumps too many pixels, and we end up with photographs that end pixelated. So where we can actually see those individual pixels. Non-destructive editing is a way that we can avoid doing that, where we can save the file in such a way where we can continue to edit on it at a later stage if we need to. And every adjustment has its own properties, has its own options, which of course we're going to explore now in just a moment. And you can pretty much control every single aspect of your photographs, of your images, through using adjustments. Very, very powerful. Now, just before we jump into Photoshop, I just want to ask you another very quick question. So I want you to tell me which of the following photographs are photoshopped. So the reason I'm asking you this is because we're speaking about adjustments. I want you to let me know which one of these images you think is, I suppose, a natural image that has not been edited at all, or one that has been photoshopped, like we think, when we associate when we talk about edited images that have been manipulated through a program like Photoshop. So type in, which ones you think are and which are photoshopped. Now it's a tricky one. Now some of these are obvious, like this final image here. This is by a couple of photographers or photographic artists, Robert and Shauna Park Harrison. They create these kind of fantastic images through the use of Photoshop. But well, the answer here is all of these photos have been photoshopped, for want of a better word. All of these images have been edited in some way. An image like this might have had some slight retouching to it. It definitely would have had adjustments to it done tonally as well. We can see that skin is very, very smooth. There's still a natural look to it too, but I know by looking at an image like this that there has been a little bit of work done to it. Not a huge amount of work. The photographer would have done as much as possible to get everything done right with the lighting. We can see it is a much more natural approach, but there is still a little bit of work done here. Similarly with the second photograph here, we have this kind of matte effect happening here to the shot. There has been a filter used at the time of exposure to get this nice, silky, smooth water. So there's, again, technical work happening at the time of the capture of the image. But there's definitely been work here, with the darkness here, adding a little bit of contrast and this type of matte effect. Here, again, this image here probably is the one that majority of people will say wasn't photoshopped, that this one has the most natural look to it. But there has been definitely work done on the saturation here to increase the overall saturation of the image here. Generally, photographs like this, when we capture them, they tend to be maybe a little bit flat, and with this we can add some in-camera adjustments to increase that saturation, but I would say that there has been some slight tweaking that has happened here to the colors of this image. And then finally, this image here very much has been edited through Photoshop. And the reason that I show you these images is that I want you to know that nearly every single photograph that you look at has had some type of editing applied to it. It is just the nature of the way that we work with photographs and images in the modern era. So don't think that when you're making any adjustments to your photographs that it's some kind of cheating or that it's something that you shouldn't be doing. It is just another part of the process. And with that in mind, let's get into making some adjustments to our images. Now, there are lots and lots of tools available to us. We'll talk about tonal adjustments first of all. And when we go into Photoshop, which we will now in just a moment, these are the adjustments that are available to us, and as you can see, there is a huge amount of them available. Loads that we can use, almost too many that it can almost be overwhelming to decide which ones that we should be using. But we're going to break it down, and we're going to focus on the ones that are most important to us now, and that's going to be our brightness and contrast, our levels, our curves, our vibrance, and our hue and saturation. As you can see here, there's lots of other options available to us, but we just want to concentrate on these. Our brightness, contrast, levels, and curves. These are our tonal adjustments, and then vibrance and hue and saturation are going to be the ones that we're going to be using for color adjustments. Now, just to break down our tonal adjustments a little bit more, as I mentioned, we'll look at brightness and contrast, levels, and curves. Now, I know the best way to learn is by doing, so we'll move into Photoshop now in just a second. Tonal adjustments can be applied to any image, black and white and colour, and indeed we are going to be working on a colour photograph. To quickly look at brightness and contrast, and you can take your time with this when watching the recordings, just simply pause the screen to get familiar with all of the different options available here. But the main two we're really going to be having a look at are simply our brightness and our contrast sliders. Brightness will add overall brightness or darkness to the image. Contrast will separate the whites from the black tones so that we get more of an impact in the photograph. We can also reduce the contrast to increase the kind of grey tones in the image. It kind of gives us a flatter looking photograph. A histogram is what we adjust when we are looking at adjusting our overall levels. Okay, so the histogram measures the volume of tones from dark to light in an image. So the horizontal part of the histogram is from black to grey to white, as you can see here with the little kind of adjustment sliders underneath it. The height of the histogram relates to the volume of that tone in the image. So a very high peak here at this section indicates that there's a lot of kind of shadow area, a lot of dark tones in the image. A lower part here indicates that there's a smaller amount of grey tones in the image. And then we have our white tones over here on this side. Output, we can change where the darkness and the bright part of the image begin. So when you adjust the output levels, you're disregarding the sections of the histogram that you're moving the outputs along. I generally wouldn't change output levels. I would typically leave them as they are and just concentrate on adjusting the histogram. And there's lots of other options there, as we can see, but the main thing I think here to understand is from left to right is from dark to light, and the height of the histogram relates to the volume of tone in the image. Again, when we put this into practice, it'll make more sense. And finally, a very brief look at curves. Curves are a lot more complicated and complex. And basically, curves, we can really map each of the individual tones in an image and increase them or decrease them to get some very unique effects, as we are going to see. But we can basically increase or decrease different points on a curve to increase or decrease the volume of that tone. As I mentioned, when we talk about the height of a histogram, that's the actual volume of tones, and we can choose where we want to make those adjustments. A very accurate tool, but certainly takes more practice with. But again, we're going to apply that now in just a second. So enough talking about that, and let's get into Photoshop. Now, so here's an image that we're going to work on in this lesson. It's a photograph I took myself of a fox that just lives down the road from me, actually, here in Dublin. So the first thing that we want to do here is, well, we want to start making some tonal adjustments. Now, if I come up to the very top menu here, we can see we've got our different options along here along the top. And we have this option here called image. And if I click image down, I have my adjustments here. That's one way that we can apply adjustments. So we can go to image, we can select adjustments, and as you can see there, we have brightness and contrast, we have levels, we have curves, we've got exposure, vibrance, hue, saturation. loads of different options there available to us. And if I wanted to apply any changes, all I have to do is simply click off one of the options there. You can see it opens up as a floating window, and I can simply start making adjustments. But that is not the most effective way to do it. And as you're going to see as we continue on throughout this course, there are hundreds of ways to do the same thing within Photoshop. There's no right or wrong way as such. There's just, I suppose, better ways of doing it and more secure ways of making changes within Photoshop as you learn more about the program. So instead of selecting my image adjustments here from the top, what we want to do is we want to select our adjustments here over on the right hand side. So we have this tab here called adjustments. Now remember, if you cannot see this, come up to window, go to arrange, and you can reset your workspace. So you want to go to workspace, you can just simply select essentials, or you can select whichever one works best for you. But essentials by default at the moment is perfectly fine for us, and we can start making changes here. And the reason that we want to use these adjustments instead is that these are known as adjustment layers. So it creates a brand new layer whenever we click off each one of these. So let's click off brightness and contrast. And as you can see, when I click off brightness and contrast, it has now created this brand new layer above my image. Now we're going to go much more in depth into layers in the next lesson, so don't worry too much about them now. But basically, a layer is almost like it's exactly what it sounds. It's another layer that exists above our image. Okay, so when I have this selected, it means I can start making changes to my image. Okay, like whatever way I want to. If I want to increase the brightness, decrease the brightness, I can add a little bit of contrast. Okay, but it's not applying it directly to the image. It's applying it on the layer above it. And I can actually toggle on and off that layer so I can see the changes that I'm making in real time. But the main thing here is that it is a non-destructive form of editing. So I'm not applying the changes directly to the image, I'm applying them to the layer above the image, and that means that it's non-destructive. It's not going to degrade or reduce the quality of the image. It is a safer way to work. And as we continue on throughout this course, we are going to be using layers in everything that we do. Okay, so with this one, I think I'm actually happy enough overall with the brightness levels, but it is lacking a little bit of contrast, so I do want to increase that. I'm going to bring that to around 25, and I could just do a quick toggle on and off. Not a huge difference there yet, but just enough to give it a little bit of a punch. Remember, contrast is when you are separating the black tones and the white tones from each other to create more contrast, to make those blacks darker and to make those whites lighter. So the next change that I want to make is I want to adjust my overall levels. It'll give me a little bit more control than just the brightness and contrast adjustments. So we'll come back to the adjustments option here. We click levels here just beside it, and it creates a brand new layer. So here we have another layer. We also have beside this white area here is known as a layer mask. Now we won't speak about layer masks in this lesson. We're going to talk about them in the next lesson, but it's very, very useful when it creates that layer mask with us here as well, because we're going to use those extensively again as we move on throughout the course. So coming back up to my my levels here, I have lots and lots of options available to me. First of all, we have preset options here. So if you want to make a quick adjustment, you can actually just click down each one of these options. We can make it darker, we can increase contrast here again, or we can lighten shadows. You can see what that does there to the image, and we can make it even lighter. There's loads and loads of options available to us there. We're going to leave it at default for the moment. Now, with our histograms, remember I said that from right to left, or sorry, from left to right, we're going from dark tones to light tones. Now, reading this histogram, I can see that there's not very many dark tones here because the volume is very low. There is a lot of shadow and grey tones, and then the light tones kind of fall off a little bit, and again it's quite low. So from left to right we've got dark to light, and the height of the histogram indicates the volume of tone. So I can see that the dark tones are very low and that the white tones are quite low as well, and I have lots of information here in the center, which for this photograph makes complete sense. Histograms are going to change depending on the type of photograph that you take. There's no such thing as a perfect histogram. For more information on histograms, do check out the photography course. But for now, just take it at my word that this is a good histogram. So I can begin to make adjustments here though. If I want to make the image a little bit darker, I can increase the darkness here. So I'm bringing in more dark tones, and you can see that's reflected in the image. I can also bring in the light tones if I wanted to make it a bit brighter. I don't want to do that in this case. I can also move the mid-tone range as well if I needed to increase the mid-tone brightness. I can go left and right there as well, but I think that's okay. And again, we'll just quickly toggle on and off the change there just to see the impact that it's had. And again, it's a subtle change. It's not doing anything major here, but I am doing small little changes. Finally then, the last adjustment in terms of tone that we can have a look at for now anyway are curves. So we click off our curves, and again we've got a brand new adjustment layer here that we can begin to work from. So curves take a little bit more getting used to. Now when we're working with curves, we can basically map out every single tone within the image, and we can increase it or decrease the brightness and darkness of it, and that can give us some fairly interesting results. Now again, lots of presets here available to us, so you can actually get with kind of color effects here, like color negative, really interesting effect there. You can go cross process. So cross process is when we had, say, a slide image, a positive image, and we processed it in a negative way. Okay, so that's going back to darkroom days. We can go darker, get some interesting effects there, increase contrast. Again, loads and loads of different options there available to us. And as we click off each of these, you can see how the curve is slowly and slightly changing. Okay, so again, we could go negative there, and you can see it actually flips the curve entirely then in that case. And again, strong contrast there as well. Lots of options available to us, but what I want to achieve with this particular image is a film-like effect. I want to make this photograph look like it's taken on a film camera. And with usually photographs taken on film cameras, they have a more kind of matte look effect to them. The darks, the blacks, tones, and that they tend to be a little bit more brighter, I guess, not as deep and not as dense as in a digital image. So I'm going to add a little bit of an effect here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on a point here. So I usually go by the grid, and if I click a point here, it creates what's called an anchor. Okay, now I can move that point up and down, and as you can see, it has an effect on that tone. So you're increasing and decreasing the brightness of that tone. It's going to have a slight impact of the other tones that are around it, but I'm going to leave that just there, pretty much, as I said, like an anchor. I'm going to come down to this other option here, this other point here, right in the corner. I'm going to drag that up. And you can see what that's doing. So it is basically making those dark tones lighter. It's reducing the dark tones there, and it's giving this kind of matte effect on the image. A nice type of matte effect. So I'm going to bring that up quite high there. I'm also going to increase the bright tones here a little bit, just to add a little bit more brightness, and bring down the brightest part of the image just down a little bit there as well. So we have this kind of S curve here, an S curve, which adds a bit of contrast, but I've also reduced the black tones a bit here as well. Okay, so I'll just bring that down a little bit more. Now we will go in more into curves in a much greater detail at a more advanced level, but for now, that's all we really need to know about curves. Now again, I can just quickly toggle this on and off to see the impact it's had. Okay, I'm actually going to increase that just that a little bit more to really exaggerate that effect. Okay, so I'm happy with how that looks. And of course, you can switch off all of the layers to see how your image looked originally. That's how it looked at the start. And let's add each of those again. And that's where we're at now with this photograph for now. Now, with curves, with exposure and with brightness and contrast, it is also possible to separate it into each of the channels. Our photographs are made up of red, green and blue, RGB. They're the primary colours of light, and they are what create our photographs. Now, if I wanted to edit just the red channels, I can click off red, and I can start to adjust that here, and you can see what happens. If I increase the reds here, it adds more red to the photograph. If I decrease it, it adds green, because the opposite of red is green. And with it, by changing each of the channels, what we can do here is we can create very unique looking colours, but we can also do things like remove colour casts from shadows or remove colour casts from highlights. So if I was, for example, to select the shadow area on the curve, I can increase the red in the shadows, or I could decrease the red in the shadows. So that's a little bit more advanced, but I just want to show you that it is possible to go very, very in-depth with your editing when it comes to adjustments. But for now, we're going to park that image just for a moment, pop back into the slideshow just to have a quick look at what we're going to do when it comes to color adjustments. So adjusting color, again, we have a huge amount of control over what we can do with color within Photoshop. And indeed, with the adjustments, the tonal adjustments, we can divide it between each channel, so you can actually adjust red, green and blue. But we're going to have a look at some options that would allow us to control each individual color in the photograph as well. And did you know it is also possible to colorize a black and white photograph? It's very time consuming, and getting the colors correct is incredibly difficult. You know, when I used to work in camera shops, it was a lot easier. Obviously, it's very easy to change a color photograph into black and white, but we did offer a service where we colorized old photographs, but it cost a fortune because it just took so long. But check out Jordan Lloyd, who colorized this photograph for Frida Kahlo, but he's done loads of other ones. He's got great videos on YouTube on how he does it, and he has a great method for getting his colors accurate. And as you can see here, the results are pretty astounding. So be sure to check him out after the lesson. So with our color adjustments, we're just going to have a look at two panels really for now. We're going to talk vibrance and saturation, very quick changes we can make to our color adjustments. And then we'll talk hue and saturation, which will give us far more control over all of the color within our photographs. Vibrance and saturation, they tend to get confused, but basically saturation will control the overall intensity of the colors in your image. You can also desaturate a photograph by reducing the saturation altogether. Vibrance works slightly differently. Vibrance will help to increase the density of weaker colors in the photograph. So if I have a photograph that has a lot of red and a lot of blue, and perhaps that blue is not as strong, not as vibrant as the red in the photograph, increasing the vibrance will help to increase the vibrancy of the blue so that it becomes the same level of vibrance as the red does. Okay, so basically it'll try to increase the vibrance of weaker colors in the image or in the photograph. Hue and saturation is a lot more complicated. As you can see, there's a lot more options available to us here. So we can see we can edit the master color, which will edit all of the colors in the photograph. But as we're going to see now in a moment, it is also possible to select individual colors as well. Saturation will control the overall saturation of that color that we've selected. We can also make that color black and white, as we're going to see. And lightness will also control basically the brightness or the darkness of that color that we have selected. Lots of other options there. As we can see, again, I recommend you check out the recording, to go over this in a little bit more detail. But let's get back into Photoshop and start applying some color edits to our fox photograph. So jumping back in here. Okay, so what we want to do now here is we come back to our adjustments, and again we go to our options, and we can see we've got our other options here. We have vibrance, and there we go, we've got vibrance and saturation. We now have another layer mask. So if I increase, well, let's adjust saturation here first of all. If I increase the saturation, well, you can see pretty much what happens there straight away. Very, very intense greens, very intense reds, lots and lots of colour there. Too much, far too much. If I go the other way, I've got a very quick black and white. A very, very quick black and white image here. Okay, now that's not the best way to create a black and white photograph. It's a quick way of doing it, but it's not the most effective way. But if you wanted to get an idea of what your photograph might look like in black and white, that's a very fast way of doing it. And we could just reset it back to normal. I'm going to, as I said, go for a kind of a film type of effect. So film negatives can sometimes come out a little bit desaturated. So I'm actually going to reduce that saturation down a little bit more. And I'm going to exaggerate it. We'll bring it down to about 20. And as you can see there, it just mutes the colors. It mutes them a little bit without removing them altogether. I'm going to then come to my vibrance. And as I said, vibrance can, if I reduce the vibrance there altogether, you can see that it actually still maintains some colors. It's actually a very interesting effect. There's a very, very muted colors there. If I increase it, it brings back a little bit of color into the image. And if I go the whole way, you can see that it's quite vibrant, but it's not. It's actually just about acceptable, but I don't want to go that far. I am going to increase it though, just to balance out that reduced saturation a little bit more, and it gives it more of a unique look. So again, if I just toggle that on and toggle it off, you can see again the difference is subtle. And it's all about subtlety when it comes to editing. You can absolutely exaggerate the editing if you like, depending on what effect you're going after. But I tend to go a little bit more subtle with my edits. And again, it just comes from practice. The more practice you do, the more you're going to develop your own style. So that's our vibrance and saturation. Let's come back to our adjustments again. And next we're going to pick hue and saturation. And this one is a much more powerful panel for editing our color. Okay, first of all, we have our master color here. Okay, so we can click this down and you can see we've got reds, yellows, greens, cyan, blue. So we can actually click more individual color strands. But let's just go with our master for the moment. And again, we've got options here. We can go with some presets like cyanotype. It's an old Victorian process for colouring photographs, which I actually did it myself manually, within the darkroom. Very interesting. You can increase saturation more. Again, increase saturation. Another one, old style, kind of a sepia tone almost, boost the reds. Lots of options there available for you to start with straight away. We'll go to our default. And if I come to hue, hue is another word for color. Hue is actually pure color. So when we talk about color, I won't go into too much technical detail, but generally color will have a tone, a tint applied to it. If you add gray to a color, you get a kind of a mid-tone color. If you add black to a color, you get darker colors, and then obviously if you add white, you get a lighter color, and it'll just change those color properties. Hue is pure color. It's just the actual color without any tone. Now if I change the hue, you can see you get some pretty crazy psychedelic things happening there. Really interesting. Okay, now I mean it's no good really, because it's changing the entire image, which I don't want. I don't want to do that. Okay, but I can select individual channels. Alright, so let's see what happens. Say I want to adjust the greens here. Okay, so I'm going to select the green. There's a lot of green here, and there's actually a lot of yellow in the photograph as well. And as you can see, when I select the greens, it's got this little indication here of the range that's selected just underneath. I can increase the saturation of the green. Yuck, that's way too much. I can decrease it, and as you can see, it removes the green altogether. We still have some aquas there. There's lots of yellow still there as well. But this is one way that you can kind of do this color selection or this color pop where you've got everything else in black and white and one thing in the photograph that's still in color. This is one way of doing it. But we're not going to do that. I am going to decrease the saturation of those greens a little bit though. I don't want them to be as strong. Okay, because I want to emphasize the fox. Okay, now I can also increase the lightness or the darkness of it. Again, you can see that has a very interesting effect on it. Okay. Very, very interesting. This kind of grey-green, you know, at the moment seems to be very, very popular on Instagram. At the time of creating this lesson anyway, trends, I should say, tend to change very, very frequently in photography. But that's an interesting look. I'm happy with that. Okay. You can, of course, if you wanted to go for a more autumnal type of look, you can change the hue. Now, obviously, we don't want to go for an alien type of look, but as you can see here, we could adjust this so it falls somewhere into the oranges here. Okay, we'd have to adjust our yellows here as well because I can see that they're also going to need to be adjusted too, and our cyans there as well. Okay, so you can see you can go for a more autumnal type of effect there. It's not really working in that case at all. So we'll just bring all of that back up to 0. Again, we'll go back to the yellows. We'll bring that back up to 0 here again. Okay. And yeah, I think we'll have to adjust those greens here a little bit more as well. Bring some of that green back a little bit. And maybe just increase that saturation. So you can see you can get a little bit fiddly with this when you start making changes here. And sometimes you wish that you hadn't done it. And of course, one thing I've neglected to mention, if you ever want to undo anything, you can come up to edit and you can simply go to undo. And of course, the option there is the shortcut Control Z. And that'll just allow you to go back and keep going back and undo any changes that you may have made. Okay. Okay, but I'm not, that looks okay to me for now. I'll just increase the lightness there a little bit as well. Let's just toggle that on and off. And that's where we're at now. I'm going to come to my reds here actually and as well. Maybe just increase the saturation ever so slightly because I want to increase the saturation on the fox. Again, if I change the hue, you can actually see it's not really having much of an impact. So it's actually not really red here that I'd have to adjust. I'd have to look at adjusting. Well, actually what I'd have to do in this case, I'd have to select the fox using a selection tool. Just to highlight the fox and then go much more into detail in adjusting the color of the fox. But for now, that is absolutely fine. Oh, of course, I forgot to have my layer switched on there as well. Now, if I make a change, there we go. So that's a good little lesson there. I made a small mistake. I had this layer switched off as I was trying to make that change. That meant I could not see any of the changes that I made. I was wondering why it wasn't changed. So just be sure when you're doing that, because I do this all the time, be sure that you have your layer visible when you're making that change. Okay, so I don't want to change the color of the fox here, not at all. I want to increase the saturation of it though a little bit, not too much, not exaggerate it. There we've got a very interesting effect. Now, that's a lot of layers that we have, adjustment layers here. So, toggling them all on and off is a bit of a pain. So what we can actually do here is we can group these together. If I click on the bottom one and I shift click on the top and I right click, I can group these layers, group from layers, just call it group 1. And it puts them all into one group. And that means I can quickly toggle on and off the changes that I have made. Okay. Really, really fast. One final thing I want to do here is I want to crop the photograph. I want to crop it. The composition is not great. So I'm going to come over to my toolbar over here on the left hand side. I click my crop tool and I can then begin to crop the photograph. I can do a free crop. simply crop whatever way I like by clicking and dragging. But I'm going to select one of these preset ratios. I'm going to go 4 to 5 or 8 by 10 inches. It's a ratio I like a lot, and we just try to position this in such a way. I'm not a big fan of this kind of branch sticking out here. I can remove that at a later stage, which I will, but for now let's center that a little bit more. We just have to click enter on that. We'll zoom in a little bit, and there we go. Okay, so that's our image for now. Now it needs more work. Let's just toggle that on and off. You might prefer the original. I definitely want to do a little bit more work on it. Obviously, with our time constraints in the lesson here, a little bit restricted in terms of what I can do. I would like to edit those greens a little bit more. The photo needs a little bit of sharpening as well. We need to add some sharpening to the image as well. It's a little bit soft. I need to do that too. But I think that's plenty to digest in this lesson, and I want you to do these kind of changes to your own photographs as well. So I'll leave it there, and let's just finish out the rest of the lesson and have a look at what's coming up in the next lesson. So well done on completing this lesson, and let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about in the next lesson, which is layers. We're going to continue on with our layers and our layer masks. So first of all, we'll talk about the importance of layers, as they allow you to build and build and build and build on an image and try out lots of different variations. And as you may have seen from this lesson, they are the key to really unlocking Photoshop's potential and trying out infinite versions of your images. We'll talk all about different layer types. So we've already had a look at adjustment layers, but we'll have a look at some other layers like typing layers, how we can add text to our images. We'll have a look at how we can make shapes using layers as well. And this adds a more graphical quality to your images. And then we'll have a look at masking. So masking is when we can combine multiple images together. Well, not just multiple images together, but we can reveal or we can hide images that are stacked in layers. And this means we can try and create lots of different types of effects. We can make some very, very cool composite images, but we can also use them with adjustment layers as well, so that we're only applying an adjustment that we've made to a certain part of the photograph. So like with the fox, I could have a layer mask where I have the fox selected, and that only the fox is going to get the changes applied to it. The rest of the photograph won't. Okay, but that'll make much more sense in lesson number 3. So be sure to join me for that lesson. Now, for your lesson challenge, I would like you to demonstrate a basic adjustment to a photograph. You can go as deep with this as you like. I encourage you to experiment, or you can be subtle like I was, well, trying to be at least with this fox image. But do try it out yourself and try and post it before and after. Simply grab a screenshot of it and show it before and after of the changes you made to a photograph or an image, and post them at facebook.com/Shaw Academy. And of course, remember, don't drop out. So you would have picked up more valuable skills in this lesson. At least I hope that you did. And we're just going to keep expanding and building on those skills. All you have to do is attend your lessons, whether it's through the recordings, whether it's through your scheduled time, whatever way you prefer. I don't mind. I just want you to do the lessons and achieve your goals. So on that note, I will leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining me for lesson number 2. I'll talk to you all again very soon for lesson number 3. So until then, take care of yourselves and bye bye.